today's world, emerging tech has become a buzzword, with AI tools like ChatGPT, Bard, and so on transforming various avenues of life from parenting to geopolitics and climate change. At such a crucial time, it becomes essential to look at the impact of AI in our everyday life, which is why we're joined by Shoma Chaudhury, the founder and director of Synapse, a one-of-a-kind tech conference gathering global thinkers from various fields to look at and question the crucial role of AI in our life today and in the future. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. So firstly, I want to talk about the inspiration of this tech conference and why did you decide to call it Synapse?
Well, as you said in your introduction, science and technology is literally pervading every aspect of our lives. And the word synapse is that space in your, between your neurons where all electric impulses happen. And that's the space where thought and action really happens. And it means connection. So, I called it synapse because we really need to see that interconnection between science, technology, and society. Typically, when you speak about science and tech, people's eyes glaze over and you think, oh, this is for Silicon Valley guys, or in the Indian context, this is for IIT geeks, People don't feel that there's any relatability with science and tech. And yet, actually, when you look at anybody's life and you look at the entire spectrum of our being, from geopolitics to literally the genes in our body to parenting, business, behavior, climate change, agriculture, terrorism, war, creativity, cinema, urban settlements, you think of the entire spectrum, from birth to death itself. Actually, science and technology is the new hand of God, is reshaping everything in our lives. So a big intent of the conference was to put science and technology at the heart of public consciousness, to make it feel relatable, urgent, intimate, to make people realize just how powerful an influence it's in our lives. And then we had three very clear intentions. One was to bring really cutting-edge thought to the country, to celebrate human ingenuity and the kind of opportunities that are rising out of it. But at the next level, it was to look at the impacts, ethics, implications of all of this in our lives and in society at large. And then the third was to do this, to present the kaleidoscope. Because like I was saying, typically people think science and tech is a very expert's domain zone, And what we wanted to show was this kaleidoscope, that it pervades all our lives and we have to recognize it as almost a social phenomenon, recognize it as a location of power and relate to it in that way. Because when you have this public consciousness, then the way science and technology is deployed in society will change, and it'll become part of a much more vibrant conversation.
So how do you think AI will impact day-to-day life, especially in avenues such as health, media, politics, given your background as a journalist?
Yeah, when ChatGPT was first made public in November 2022, and that's barely a year ago, immediately, companies like Goldman Sachs and even as recently as at the World Economic Forum, the IMF, they put out reports which said that this technology, not just ChatGPT, but overall generative AI has the potential to displace almost 300 million jobs globally, IMF recently said it's going to impact 60% of jobs in the first world and around 40% jobs globally. In an emerging economy like India, it will be about 25% jobs. But the key thing was that in the past, there have been a lot of technological disruptions or milestones in human history. But there's a real sense this time that this is absolutely different because it's not just going to replace human skills, it has the potential for replacing human beings altogether, And earlier there was also a sense that jobs that were mechanical would get replaced by automation. And one has seen that, and that has had a lot of social disruption in any case. But right now, what is happening is that jobs or professions that one thought was completely outside the purview of machine learning or deep learning was the jobs which required imagination, empathy, creativity. These were thought that these will be domains of human beings. But what's happened with generative AI is that those are the exact professions that are being displaced. So in the first year of ChatGPT and other generative AI models coming out, 250,000 technological jobs were lost in 2023. We've seen the strikes by Hollywood. You've seen lawsuits by writers and artists, very, very worried about this process. At the same time, it also releases a lot of optimism, and there's a lot of possibilities of people, using these tools to express their own creativity. But in journalism, there's a very interesting statistic which says 90% of news is going to be written by AI in just 3-4 years, And now you have amazing personations, these are like blurring the absolute lines between the real and the virtual. So I think there's an entire societal rethink because the new technologies, there's one that OpenAI has just released called Sora, which you just type in some words, it's producing film, which is so real that you absolutely cannot tell that this is generated by AI, So whether in journalism, whether people are being replaced by virtual avatars and persona, whether you'll get massive deep fakes during, politically sort of fraught. For instance, we are all running into elections now, or in the US, you have people who are deep within the community saying that this has to be banned at least during elections because the quality of deep fakes that can be created now is so huge. So there's employment, there's technological displacement, there's the creative jobs being taken over by machines, there are copyright issues. It's really disrupting human culture altogether. And yet, I don't want to only focus on the negatives because like you said, there's the possibilities of what it can do in the health space, of agriculture, distance learning, education. So at the same time, you have things like, say, drug discovery. Typically takes $3 billion to turn one molecule into medicine, But already because through AI you can do simulations, the cost of drugs could come down, the discovery of materials could go up. So, it's a very complex issue, which is what makes Synapse so exciting, because it's only when you have a lot of multifaceted discussions around this that you'll know even how to recognize and deal with this technology the way that it has to. And this technology, by the way, is only one of a plethora of sciences and technologies, the life sciences, biosciences, that is, there's a kind of simultaneous tipping points that is kicking in. And I felt that in India, there was still not that level of public consciousness that is required. We are all being changed in our sleep. We are being impacted without engaging with these issues. So that's the excitement of this conference.
Right. So a theme that you also mentioned and that we've been seeing in mainstream conversation is the fact that job insecurity has been so closely related to AI, and a lot of the mainstream conversation is surrounding this. So how do you think this tech conference is going to shift that conversation of AI from jobs insecurity to some of the more positive aspects, as you mentioned, the revolutions in health and so on?
Well, I think both things need to go together. I'm not sure that necessarily the conference is going to shift that dialogue. Like I said, almost everything that we're going to present at the conference is running on the horns of a dilemma. Whereas at one level, there's the possibility of abundance, of democratization of knowledge, of power. There's the idea of, like I said, efficiencies being increased. But at the same time, all of the negative aspects are also there. So I'm not sure that we should shift the spotlight away from either. It's about, there's another very deep discussion happening now, which is to not look at this technology as though it's a kind of demigod that is arriving from some other place, It's very much in human control still. There are coders that are coding these machines. There are coders that are, yes, there's a whole other order of discussion, which is that because these are being trained on such gigantic petabytes of data, that there's a phenomenon called the black box, which is that even the coders and the makers of these systems themselves don't understand how these systems are learning or their emerging qualities that the coders don't know. And those are real fears. This black box phenomenon is a real fear. But at the same time, in the immediate context, it's very important to remember that there are 4 or 5 big companies and there are human beings who are coding these technologies. So it's very possible that when you're deploying this in society, that you set the parameters of what this technology should do and what it can do. And there's a big sort of debate brewing now that these technologies should not be about replacing human beings, but complementing human beings, So that is something that is within the possibility and within the control of, say, companies like Microsoft and Google and all the big tech companies that are really in a lab race to put these technologies out, And yet there's a third part of this dilemma, which is that you don't want to constrain sort of innovation or knowledge seeking, So there are many levels to this discussion, and that's again the point of this conference, which is that you bring ethicists, philosophers, economists, lawyers, policy, political people, technology people, scientists, so that each one begins to inflect the other's perspective, because there's no one perspective on this. It's a massive force, which it's almost like there's a new phrase which is going around, which is it's techno-feudalism or techno-nations, because these are cross-border, it's crossing geography, it's crossing stratas of society. Just recently in Bletchley Park, they created, there's this, even our own, Rajiv Chandrasekhar and Ashwini Vaishnaw, they've been talking about the need for a coalition of nations to deal with these technologies, because these are not geography specific, They're cutting across geography, across stratas, across languages. So you actually need like almost, global scale thinking about how do you deploy this in ways which are aligned with humanity.
Right. A key aspect that not a lot of people are discussing about AI is the ethical challenges behind it. As you are a former journalist, what do you think are some of the ethical...
I wouldn't call myself a former journalist.
Okay.
I think even part of this, of creating new thought or new canvases of conversations, I would say is a fundamental part of journalism, So once a journalist, always a journalist, yes.
Of course, but what do you think are some of the ethical challenges behind the use of AI, especially considering a lot of countries are also looking at integrating AI with military use?
Yes. No, they're gigantic ethical, and again, there's a whole ladder of these. It starts with at the coding level, what are the biases that are coded into the algorithm? Because again, let's remind ourselves that there are human beings coding this, So there's a kind of culture out of which the technology rises. So there's a huge conversation about diversity. Who are the coders, or if it's mostly white male, who've had the opportunity to do that, then those companies need to have people of color, people of gender, people of varying sexualities, so that, because these are gigantic structures and they are going to impact the way you think. If you put them into education, they're shaping children's minds, their responses, so all of that at the very fundamental level, there's the issue of diversity and bias. And then there are the use cases of this, So for instance, before we even come to the military, in America, AI is now being used for triaging people who are in jail, for instance. Should somebody get parole or not is decided by an AI algorithm. Now, that algorithm is reflecting bias. So if there's a white offender or a black offender is more likely to, be looked at as a sort of a threat zone than a white person. And this is patently unfair, right? So it's being used like that. Then Forbes has said that 99% of Fortune 500 companies, 99% are already using AI for hiring and firing, So this outsourcing of decision making to a gigantic technological construct, which is being coded by very few, forget even military. So whether you get a loan, whether you get a job, whether you're up for health insurance, all of this is going to be decided by an algorithm, So you can imagine the social implications of something like this and the ethical issues in terms of who gets to code this, what are the value systems you'll put into it, And then comes the military use. And that is something, like I said, we are focusing on AI, but there are just amazing sort of innovations happening at the life sciences, from gene editing to CRISPR to 3D printing of organs to, we have speakers coming who are talking about fusing the brain into machines, so it's brains without bodies. Imagine the kind of autonomous, asymmetrical, anonymous use that these can be put to in a military context by even non-state actors, by lone wolf actors. So it's a massive force coming towards, which will engulf societies, across the borders. And I mean, Yuval Harari, who's a historian of human civilization, he's not used to giving hyperbole, but he literally said that this is kind of stealing the keys of civilization, And there are philosophers worrying. I mean, there are people, again, a speaker we have at the conference called Jaron Lanier, he's called the prime unifying scientist of Microsoft. And he says, there's one fear that AI can become something like from the movies, that it'll become autonomous and it'll extinguish human society. And he was saying that's not what the fear is. The fear is that it'll drive us insane because we won't be able to tell what's real and what's not. Who is making decisions for you? You won't even have control over that, And then, of course, like I said, there's the huge military uses that's possible. So again, coming back to that, a platform like this becomes gigantically important, that many facets of societies, many good thinking minds begin to become stakeholders in this conversation.
So you've gathered together a very exciting group of global thinkers. So who do you think we should look out for at this conference?
All 40 of them. Seriously, I mean that. Yes, I mean, the speakers themselves are very excited about coming, because I think this particular unique combination has not happened, certainly not in India, but Rajan Anandan, who was the head of Google Asia earlier, and he's now, he was head of Sequoia Asia, and now he is partner at Peak 15. And he gave us a lovely shout out, because he said, this is the first of its kind in India, but possibly the world, And that's why I literally mean that all 40 speakers are fantastic, because each one of them represents a different facet of this conversation that I've been talking about. But if you were to literally force me to choose, then really tough to do. But, there's Michael Sandel, who's a philosopher of technologies and its intersection with society. He's a Harvard philosopher who fills up stadiums, with his justice lectures, so he's coming. There's Thomas Friedman, who's actually looked at this intersection between science, tech, and human beings, nature, science, and tech, and human beings for like almost 2-3 decades, from when he first wrote his book, The World is Flat. He's been looking at this shifting dynamic. So, he's a veteran of watching these global trends. And again, from being a tech optimist, he's now become a tech cautionary, So he's coming, and he's a 3-time Pulitzer winner. We have, Liz Parrish. She's somebody, she calls herself patient zero. She calls herself the most genetically modified person on the planet, because they're looking at age reversal, And this is not just about expanding lifespan for healthier living. It's people who are actually saying that death or age is not inevitable, and that you can reverse age. And because these sciences and technologies are already there, but they've not been cleared for human trial, she actually went to South America outside of FDA regulations, and she injected herself with gene therapies for age reversal. So she's literally making herself a human experiment, So she's very interesting, controversial, really forcing a lot of discussions around science and tech. She's there. There's, from India, we have some fantastic speakers. We have Sharad Sharma, who, is the founder of iSpirit. He's been very much part of creating the India Stack, which is the public digital infrastructure. We have Swami Sarvapriyananda, who's a Vedanta master. And he's going to look at the whole idea of consciousness, in a time of AI. We have creative people. We have Javed Akhtar, Shekhar Kapoor, Sonu Nigam, Raju Hirani, who are going to be part of a panel. Amir Khan was coming, but he's had a personal situation, and, he's not been able to come. But we have Rana Daggubati, we have Nag Ashwin. So, we have Anand Gandhi, people who are really thinking about, even beyond the superficial, not even superficial, the immediate conversations about human displacement. These are people who are really thinking about, what does it mean to be human? If you can be replicated, replaced, reduced, mimicked, who are we? What are we even as a species? Maybe the whole exceptionalism about being human beings is itself under question, So there are some very deep conversations, there are political conversations. Eric Daimler was a former advisor to Obama on AI. So, he's a he's an AI entrepreneur as well. There's Daniel Susskind, who was an advisor to the UK government on AI, and he's an economist who's written a book called The Future Without Work. You have Anders Sandberg, who's a transhumanist. There's a whole class of technologists who genuinely believe that there's nothing fixed about being human, and that everything is up for mutation and for grabs. So there's from Elon Musk to Ray Kurzweil to very influential people to Bill Gates, Stephen Hawkins, Anders Sandberg, Nick Bostrom, people like this, they're called the Tescrials. They genuinely believe in transhumanism. They say there's nothing fixed about being human. There's nothing stopping humans and machines from melding. And they're spending billions of dollars into making this possible, from nanotechnology to quantum to gene editing to AI. It's a whole fascinating world out there. So people, we have people from quantum. We have India's lead researcher on quantum, which is the next exponential technology that's going to hit us. AI will almost look like nursery school compared to if quantum comes to a full boiling point like they're expecting it to. So yeah, a lot of people coming.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us.
Been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
you.